do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
The Detroit Pistons have quite the rebuild on their hands. With quite possibly the worst roster in the league and not a lot of young talent either, it might be a long road back to contention for Detroit. What's up, everybody? My name is Ethan, this is Courtside TV, and today we're going to be talking about the Detroit Pistons. What to do with Blake Griffin? Griffin is coming off a knee surgery which ended his season early last year. The last full season he was healthy, he was actually a pretty good player. He was on one of the All-NBA teams, was one of the better seasons of his career efficiency-wise, improving as a shooter, rounding out his game a little bit more to, compensate for his waning athleticism. But after that knee injury last year, a lot of people really consider Blake to be on one of the worst contracts in the league and is almost an untradeable player. You're not going to get much back for him. And he is just a guy who has really kind of fallen off a cliff over the last year, at least in terms of public perception. For me, it's always been a little weird, people, writing off Blake Griffin as just a horrible player and he's never going to be good again. Like I said, his last healthy season, he was an All-NBA player. Now, there is a lot of reason to believe that after injuries have piled up for him, he's not going to be the same guy. And I do agree he's never going to be, that same level of player, but I do think he can actually help teams. He can help a contender, I feel like. And I think there are a few teams out there that might be willing to take a chance on him, especially because he has, next season and then a player option for the following year. So it's pretty much a 2-year contract. Whoever's bringing him in, it's not a huge long-term commitment. It is a lot of money at around $37 million a season, which that's a lot. But I would not rule out, a contender potentially being interested in Blake Griffin. Now, for the Pistons, I don't know what you're going to get back for that. If you can get back maybe like a late pick or some young player or something, or even if it's just dumping that salary away, I think that makes a lot of sense for Detroit because, like I said, the roster is really, really bad. Outside of Blake Griffin, they don't have much, and they're just going to have to look, towards getting as much young talent as they possibly can. And so whatever you can get for Blake Griffin, even if it's just getting off that contract and not having to pay him in a small market, I think it makes sense for them to do it, and I would anticipate them to explore that possibility. Now, will there be a team that is interested in taking him? I'm not sure, but if they could, I think they definitely should trade Blake Griffin this offseason. And really the only other player that I feel comfortable putting in the designation of a core player is probably Christian Wood. And it's a little bit weird for him because he is a free agent this offseason, and we've heard a lot of rumors about him, getting a pretty sizable raise on his contract. He was, he's on a minimum deal right now. At only 25 years old, he's still young and still getting better. And, there's been a lot of teams rumored to have interest in Christian Wood, potentially bringing him in for, upwards of $10 million a season. Is Detroit willing to match that? And is Wood even willing to go back to Detroit? Because, they haven't been a winning franchise for the past couple of years. There's no indication they're going in a positive direction. So for him, if he wants to go to a team that's, a little bit more ready to win now, and I think that would make sense for him and for both sides to be able to get a center who, is still developing and has shown some serious flashes of being a really, really good player in the NBA. So we will just have to see how much he gets. For Detroit, I wouldn't be too upset letting him walk. Like I said, he's 25, which it might sound a little weird to say, but that's almost a little outside of their timeline, just with how little they have on this roster. They're going to be starting with 2 or 3 rookies in a row here that they're going to be drafting and trying to develop these guys. And by the time a lot of these players that they're going to draft this year, next year, and the year after are becoming into their primes, Christian Wood is going to be in the middle of his or past it. And so it's kind of almost weird, but a 25-year-old might be outside of this team's timeline here. So we'll have to see what they decide to do with him. I don't think it's a bad idea to bring him back either if you can get him for a fair deal. Wouldn't break the bank for Christian Wood, especially for Detroit. A different team, I would certainly offer him a decent amount of money if you can afford it, just to bring in somebody like that on a pretty barren free agent market this offseason. I think he's a guy who is probably going to get paid. So Christian Wood, although he is one of the better players on this team, I think there's a pretty good chance he actually leaves in the offseason. So what does the rest of the roster look like, and what are the Pistons going to do from here? They've got a lot of cap space this offseason. They've got a lot of guys who are expiring, heading into free agency. They've got some of these big contracts that that they've traded for at the deadline to accumulate picks and younger players and whatever. And a lot of these contracts are coming off their books now. Brandon Knight, John Hinston, Langston Galloway, all of those guys are coming off the books, and none of them are going to likely re-sign with the Pistons. I would not anticipate any of the three of those guys coming back. They're all, veterans past Detroit's timeline, of course, and none of them are great players. So if they are going to, continue their careers in the NBA, it's going to be elsewhere on the veteran minimum, probably with contenders who are looking to round out the end of their bench. It makes no sense for Detroit to even consider bringing any of those guys back. Then you come to the question, where does the rest of their cap space go? Because they're one of the few teams who actually have cap space this offseason, and it's kind of weird because they don't really feel like a fit for any of the major free agents, which is kind of weird. So does that cap space go to a Christian Wood extension, or do they want to consider bringing in a guy like Montrezl Harrell or Fred VanVleet or any of these other, mid-20s guys who are entering free agency? Detroit's going to have a lot of cap space to pay them, but if they do, it doesn't really turn them into a contender. Of course, they're still going to be a bad team even if they do bring in one of those, decent free agents. So it's going to be interesting to see where they decide to use this cap space. Do they sign kind of like the Knicks did last year, where they sign players to big one-year deals and potentially trade them down the line, or like a big 1 year with like a team option for the following, and see if you can get anything for some of these players at the deadline? That doesn't seem like a bad option to me if you can, bring in any of those guys. And if you decide you want to use that cap space on bringing back Christian Wood, then that's not a terrible idea. Like I mentioned earlier, Thon Maker is a guy at 23 years old who has been pretty disappointing, but he still seems like he has at least a decent bit of potential. I wouldn't break the bank for him either, but potentially bringing back him on a fair deal is something that you could do with that money. Jordan McRae is another guy who's a veteran. They probably don't need him back. So, again, they kind of don't have a direction. I do also want to mention Luke Kennard and Sekou Doumbouya, who are, really the only young pieces on the roster that I anticipate them keeping for a long duration of time. Specifically Doumbouya, he is so young and so raw, and he had a pretty solid last season, but he is a guy who is not going to be ready to be a high-level NBA player for a couple of years, and that's okay. Detroit has time to wait for him, and he's going to be, one of their guys that they're relying on for their future. Him, whoever they draft this year and over the next couple, is going to be the core of their team moving forward. And Kennard, similar to Wood, he's almost a little outside of their timeline at 24. There was some heavy rumors about them potentially moving him at the deadline. There was heavy rumors about, him to the Phoenix Suns where a deal fell through there. So maybe there's teams that will be interested in trading for Luke Kennard if the Pistons don't want to extend him, because he does have a rookie extension coming up, and he expires next year. They can work on an extension for him this offseason if they choose to. So Kennard is a guy who I would actually potentially watch on the trade market if Detroit decides that they don't want to pay him and they'd rather flip him to, keep their team really, really young in the 19, 20, 21 range and potentially accumulate some more of that younger talent if you can get any for the Blake Griffin contract. Maybe get a little bit younger with Kennard, as well as Derrick Rose, who is going on to an expiring contract at around $7 million. That's a perfect number for contenders to be able to get a hold of. There's contenders around the league that can cobble together salaries in order to make that happen. And if you can flip Derrick Rose and get a first round pick or a younger player, that's definitely something that I would do if I was the Pistons. I anticipate they will. If not this offseason, it'll happen at the deadline. I don't think Derrick Rose finishes this season on the Pistons, and they should be able to get at least something back for him. So that's really what the offseason is going to look like for Detroit: getting younger, getting draft picks, and looking for trades for veterans. So I've kind of said it already, but I think Detroit just needs to get any young talent they can get their hands on. And they do have the 7th overall pick in this year's draft, it's a pretty good selection in terms of there should be a lot of decent players available there for them. They should have, a variety of options, and the Pistons are not drafting for need at this point. They're going to take best player available. Nobody on the roster outside of maybe Doumbouya is going to be there in 2 to 3 years, at least in my estimation. And so they're just going to pick whoever they think is the best player that they can get their hands on there. So maybe they want to pick somebody with a little bit of star potential and a guy who is flashy and gets, can sell some tickets there in a pretty small market. At number 7 overall, I would watch for LaMelo Ball dropping. I have heard, from a lot of different places, a lot of different people that I'm paying attention to with sources in the draft have LaMelo Ball slipping, as of the last week or so. We'll have to see if any of that comes true. But for Detroit, if you can get Ball at number 7, I think that's a pretty solid fit there. And maybe even considering a trade up if you can do it, whether that involves Derrick Rose or involves Luke Kennard or a future pick in order to trade up a couple spots to select LaMelo. I would not be upset at that either. So we will just have to see what they decide to do. But looking for really best player available. And at number 7, that might seem a little low, but I would not be surprised if that is LaMelo Ball. So we will just have to see what happens for the Pistons in the draft. But we're getting really close now, and we're going to see a lot of rumors start flying. And so, it's going to be pretty exciting. But that's going to be it for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. This was the first of the 8 teams that were not in the bubble for the NBA. So I saved all of those 8 teams for last, and we're going to be going through them leading up to the draft as we get closer. Next one will probably be, probably on Monday, and we'll be working our way through the rest of the 8 teams. So that's going to be it for me today, and I'll see you guys in the next one.